Let me
That's
bring
you.
it in.
Brilliant. Okay, if everybody else can put yourselves on mute, if you can, that would be great.
All right, so I was asked to share today about my journey with Rotary. You guys would have seen me at hopefully close to once a month with you all, but you might ask, who is Becca? How did this American get to be part of the West of Scotland's Eclub? And what's her connection with Rotary in Scotland? So that's what I'm going to share today. So to start, I'm going to give a little background about myself. So I'm from a small town. It has been called a village in Iowa, right along the Mississippi. And I grew up with a big family. I'm one of 5 siblings, but we're also very close with all of my mom's siblings and my cousins on that side. And she's one of 9, and I have 26 cousins. So big family that all were pretty close. I went to school in Bellevue, Iowa, which is about 10 miles south of St. Ignatius, which is the town where I grew up. And then I ended up going to college in Dubuque at Loras College, which is north of St. Ignatius by about 15 miles. So growing up, my dad was a former teacher who turned to be a post office worker, and my mom owned her own beauty salon. Our family enjoyed taking trips in the summer just around nearby states, and service was a huge part of our family. I'm putting this out there because it helps show how Rotary ends up connecting with me later on. So we volunteered at retreats for adults with disabilities. We worked local fundraisers. One was a Thanksgiving meal where we served meals to the local homeless. So that was always a big part of our lives. With my dad also being a former teacher, education was a huge part of our lives. Stories, reading, we always played school growing up. That was just what we did. So when I went to Loras College, I went to be a teacher. I graduated there in 2015 with my bachelor's in elementary education. Focus areas were special education and reading. I also have a classical studies minor. I enjoy learning. That was a fun area. The classical studies minor is also important because it was the first time I traveled outside the US. I went to Greece for a class for 2 weeks, and that's when the travel bug really got it to me, and when I knew I wanted to maybe go abroad more. So after graduating, I taught 1 year of 3rd grade and 3 years of 2nd grade. It was after my 2nd year of teaching 2nd grade that I was feeling restless. I didn't feel like I quite was doing or I wasn't where I wanted to be. And so I started looking at what to do, options to go forward. And it was that summer after my 3rd year of teaching that someone was talking to me, and they said, "You're a huge lover of books. You grew up, well, spending a lot of time in a library. Have you ever thought about getting your master's in library science?" And that was very much a light bulb moment for me, that was the direction that I should go in. As I mentioned earlier, I got the travel bug. I knew I wanted to do and spend more time abroad. I had visited Scotland on a previous trip and fell in love with it. So when I started looking for universities to get my master's at, Scotland was one place I looked at. And taking a step back to showing a map of where I was, not Idaho, not Ohio, which we get confused for a lot, but Iowa. And on the map here, I have the arrows. The purplish arrows, St. Ignatius, pointing to we're not large enough to actually be a dot on the map. Bellevue south of there. And Cedar Rapids, I have an arrow there because that's the area I live in now. Let's see here. So here's some pictures of St. Ignatius where I grew up. We're a small Luxembourg village. Very small. I think it's 150 people still to this day. It might be fewer, but we still have some of the old buildings. Dubuque is more populous. It's about 50,000. Still not very big though, of course. It is special because there's a bridge across the Mississippi that goes to Illinois, and a little ways up the river, there's a bridge from Dubuque going across to Wisconsin. So just some pictures. Bellevue is where I taught and where I went to school growing up. All right, so now finding Rotary. In August of 2019, I applied to the University of Strathclyde, and by early September, I was accepted. And so with being accepted, I began looking at scholarships. Being a teacher for 4 years, unfortunately, didn't pay a whole bunch that would just easily make my way through. So I knew I'd be taking out a loan and looking at scholarships. And in that search, I was actually talking on a Zoom call with some people from the University of Strathclyde when they recommended that I look into the Rotary Scholarship. And so I reached out to a local Rotary member, and I should have shared before this, I knew that our town, or the nearby town, Bellevue, had a Rotary Club. I didn't know much about it. We had never, as a family, really done much with Rotary. I knew it existed. I knew they did litter picks for the nearby highways. Sometimes they would do scholarships for the schools and such. So that was my previous experience. And I knew one of the Rotary members, Linda Nudd, and I reached out to her asking what she knew about Rotary scholarships. And she mentioned a scholarship, what is today the Global Grant Scholarship, but she meant it was under a different name at the time she knew it. So we had to do a little bit of work to find out what it was currently called. And so during that process, I began looking more and more at what and who Rotary was and what the scholarship entailed. And it was during this time of looking up Rotary that I began to notice there were connections between their mission statements and what we believed in to what I also believed in. And so I was connected with a slightly bigger Rotary Club in Dubuque, where they got me started with the application and the scholarship process. The process was huge. And at the time, this was all happening very, very fast for me. Like I said, it was end of August I applied. In September I was accepted. And in September still, I was starting to work on this scholarship because I found out that it was going to be due, or they were going to be picking someone by November. So it was September. I needed to get that application right away to be able to be considered for the next fall. So with my background as a teacher, I went with the Rotary's area focused of supporting education. Knowing that I wanted to go into library science, I knew that my days of education and teaching weren't over. I just wanted to go in a different direction. So my application was submitted by the end of September. The Dubuque Club was very, very helpful. They had a former English teacher on the board who helped me by proofreading my application and giving suggestions. So I was so thankful for them for all of that help. And I had an interview scheduled by the end of October. It was either end of October, early November. And I remember I was driving when I got the call that I was accepted, and I was so, so thankful. I think I was near tears that day, if not in tears, because though I said I could take out a loan and cover this, and I knew I was going to do it, I also knew that this would make a very different experience for me and how I approached getting my master's. So this is where, very excited moving forward. Early February 2020, it was decided Bellevue Rotary was going to be my home Rotary Club, and Rotary of Charing Cross Glasgow was going to be my host club. And I was set to start my master's in the fall of 2020. But if you notice in this last one, February 2020 might start to ring some bells. Before I get into that, Bellevue Rotary, they do some cool projects. Actually, the picture in the corner with the litter pick, I was a part of it that day. We were social distancing and masking. I'm not in that picture, of course, but I got to be a part of that. And so March 2020, COVID hit, and uncertainty hit, of course, for everyone. This isn't just me, this was across the board. I was still teaching at the time, and I remember we had just finished parent-teacher conferences, And a couple of the parents and I had even talked, that the sickness was here. We were a little worried, how was it going to affect us? And then before we knew it, we were shut down. So though COVID obviously was horrible in a lot of ways, it changed my experience and shaped it in a very different way. So because of COVID, people were moving online, and I was able to start visiting some of the Scottish Rotary clubs early while still in the US. So April 2020, I was able to join an online quiz, and actually John was there. I'm trying to think who else was there at the time. It was kind of cool. Mariella was there, Peggy Savage. But yeah, so I got to meet some people. And so before I even made it to Scotland, I was meeting Rotary members in Scotland. In May, when I should point out, if you guys were like me, and I'm sure you were, when it first hit, there was kind of this hope that maybe we would solve it and we'd be past COVID in a couple of weeks or so. Maybe we'd have this over in a month. Maybe we could go back to school. In the US, we kept saying, we might go back to school next month and next month. But that wasn't happening. And in May, there was the question whether the universities would be returning to classes in the fall. And in July, it was finally said, all right, yes, you can go through with it. And so I met with Charing Cross Glasgow Rotary members through Zoom at that time. I also met with the Eastwood Rotary Club in August. And then following all of that, I was able to make it to Glasgow September 14th, 2020. I'm going to say it was also put out there, and I was given the option to delay my master's for a year, but after all of the process, I was ready to move forward. I had kind of closed the chapter on my teaching in my school, and I was ready to go forward, so I decided to go forward with this. So my master's itself, I lived in a very diverse flat at the university. This was really cool. I had flatmates who were from Italy, Greece, Hong Kong, China, and Zambia. And so that was very important because with COVID, we weren't going out meeting people like you normally would at uni. So we were spending holidays together. Once a month, we did meals together. So that was very important. All my classes were online through Zoom. Originally, they were hoping in the spring we would be back in person, but that didn't happen. Still met some wonderful people from my classes. I have a very good friend who I'm still in contact with today, who lives in Linlithgow. And through my classes, I had a placement with the Renfrewshire libraries, and I was connected with the school librarians. And in a normal normal school year, I would have been able to go to some of those schools and see what those school librarians were up to. Instead, I did interviews with them. I got to hear about their programs they were leading and what they were doing. And in the end, I put a report together actually for the Renfrewshire libraries that was tracking all of the programs and attendance. And so finally, my dissertation for my master's was a case study called Museum Archives, Creating Online Displays for Gairloch Museum. This was very neat. Again, normal year, I might have been able to go to Gairloch Museum, but I still learned a lot from this. I learned about Kay Matson and her experience with the Stone of Destiny. And actually, Gairloch Museum still has the web pages I created during my master's as part of their website. So during my master's, throughout all of this, Rotary saved me in so many ways, helped me out in so many ways is maybe the word. When I first got to Scotland in September, I had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And though I brought a lot of stuff with me, I didn't think about how I wouldn't have, the school promised us the box of starter goods for quarantine. So we had food and stuff like that. But we had like some canned foods that didn't have a can opener for. And so no way to open it. And I was in a bit of a panic. I didn't have like some things like bed sheets or other things in the room. So early on, Charing Cross Glasgow Rotary stepped up and they showed up with a box of supplies that carried me through those 2 weeks and actually longer as well, because they gave some things like silverware and plates and all that. And then the Zoom meetings. I was able to go out and I did a little bit of traveling on my own when we were able to with the quarantine. But the biggest way I was talking to people was through the Zoom meetings. I visited many Rotary clubs during that time. A few of them include Rotaract, Eastwood, Kelvin, Erskine, Charing Cross, Kilmarnock. I'm probably forgetting a few, but those are just a handful of them. And I think it's important to keep in mind and keep things in perspective. If I would have been in Scotland in a normal year, I would have probably visited a lot of those clubs, but I wouldn't have been able to keep up with them the way I was through Zoom. I didn't just visit these clubs once. Often I'd be visiting these clubs monthly or every other month. So I was able to make some good friends and connections that way. So spring 2021, things were starting to let up a little bit. I was able to do a litter pick with Rotaract members. So that was my first kind of outing with a Rotary club. I did attend the virtual district conference in April 2021. And then I was able to travel and see more of Scotland than what I had just gotten to by myself. So John and Joyce took me to Killeen Castle, Helensburgh. I don't remember the name of the overlook, but an overlook for sure. Part of that was for my birthday. I was able to do something for my birthday and see things on my birthday. Glenys Taverner, she took me to Pitlochry and Blair Castle. Pat and Paul Hindle, they took me out for a tea and a drive around some local areas outside of Glasgow. Finally got to do a meal with Charing Cross Rotary. Mariella Gatan, we went to Loch Lomond and Largs, Paisley, Troon. And then, like I said, the Rotaract, we did a litter pick and we also were able to go out and get drinks. So Rotary supported me through friendship and interactions with other humans during this time, and in a very different way than what we would have done in a normal year. So I have that final thing I wrote here because it was so important to put it out there that this was not a regular year. And so it wasn't just the scholarship that helped me in this. Rotary was there for me in a time when we were kept apart. I wasn't alone and I had that connection and people constantly checking in on me. So here are some pictures. It's hard to see John, Joyce, and I at Killeen Castle in the bottom. A picture with me with the Rotaract, from my meal with the Charing Cross Rotary members, Mariella and I, and one of our explorations. So I have people ask me all the time, if you could go back and redo it, would you have waited a year? Would you have done it a different year? And it's hard to say, you know, in retrospect, there's always the, oh, I wish I would have had a normal year. But at the same time, whenever people ask me that, I say no. I've made such wonderful connections. I've met so many wonderful people that a different year, it would have been different. And I'm sure I would have met people as well, but there was something special about this year for me. So, the end of my time in Scotland came up at the end of August 2021. I was lucky before I did leave to back to the US, my dad was able to come over and see a little bit of Scotland with me. In non-COVID times, perhaps more of my family would have gotten over with me. But of course, there was still all the testing you had to do before you could travel. And so only he was able to visit me. I came back to the US, however, and I did return to teaching. The school I previously taught at was in contact with me, and they actually wanted me to come back full time. And I said, that's not the path that I'm on anymore, but I'll be happy to help you out while I'm looking for a job. So I covered a maternity leave for them and then another short leave. And during that time, I was job searching and interviews, and Marion Public Library had an opening with their programming team, interviewed with them early January, and I started with them end of January. So Marion Public Library, when I started with them, they actually didn't have a building. They were not open. Some of you may recall hearing about the derecho of 2020 that hit Iowa. Marion was the center of that. And their library that they had was destroyed. And so when I got hired, they were in the process of finishing their new building. We were scattered across 4 locations with the programming team one place. We had a tiny, tiny storefront where patrons could still pick up books and get on computers. The management of the library was located at City Hall. And then we had an annex, which was a big warehouse where all the books were kept at that time. Our new library is something very, very special in our community. It's very much a community center. I work in the children's department as the programmer. As you can see in this one corner, we have a play structure with a slide. And I'll be honest, most days it's not my favorite thing in our library, but families and children sure love it. We also have a light bright wall. This picture is just the outside of it. You can see a little bit up above, we have an outdoor reading terrace. We have a maker space. Our maker space has a long arm quilter, 2 different 3D printing machines. We have sewing machines, a laser etcher. So we're able to offer a lot of cool things to our community. We recently got bikes that have motors on them that people are actually able to check out from the library and use. So very popular new space. My job as a programmer, I run various programs. I plan them and get all the supplies from them, put them on. And one of my main ones is baby story time. And this one's important because this is probably where I see the education part of my background coming out. I am teaching in this instance. We're doing fundamental reading practices, and the caregivers that are there with them are learning them. And we're taking that time to spend time with the children. This is important because when I was a teacher, so often we'd see kids come through school whose parents were either too busy or they just didn't care about sitting and reading with their kids. And so the kids wouldn't have this care for reading or didn't do well with reading. So I'm really enjoying that story time. It has gotten very popular since we've opened. I started with 1 baby story time and we had so many people, we had to split it into 2. I also run senior programs at the library. We do a senior social hour. We have a Tai Chi instructor come in, senior special where we watch some documentaries. And then Encore Cafe is a local community endeavor that brings nutritional meals to the library that are meant for seniors. It is free if you're, I think it's 60 and above. They do ask for a $5 donation, but if someone doesn't have the money for that, they can still come and have the meal. And so I connect with them to bring presentations to those meals and music once a month. I bring in local authors. I run our seed library. We have a cabinet that has vegetable seeds and flower seeds in it. And so members of the community are able to come and check those out. We don't expect anything in return. The hope is to address food uncertainty in the community. With that, we have master gardeners I bring in. Sometimes we go visit parks for park play dates. Summer library program that we're just finishing up on. And some other of my smaller programs include a puzzle exchange. We do a Kentucky Derby party, and we're in the planning process right now for our first book fair for adults that are going to bring local vendors to the library. So that is to say, I keep it very busy with my current job, but I am enjoying it very, very much. Since returning home, I'm still keeping up with Rotary. I was a speaker at the Bellevue Rotary Club. Of course, they were my home club while I was in Scotland. So in the picture, Rick and Linda were my 2 members that I connected most often with. And of course, now I'm with the Eclub here. I say recently, but it was probably a year ago now, did a video interview about my master's and experience with Rotary for the Global Grant Scholarship. For a promotional video for our Rotary district here in Iowa. And recently it came to my mind that though I can't, or it's difficult for me to visit local clubs due to timing in my job, most of them are lunch clubs, I think I'm going to begin reaching out to them and trying to help with events that they're doing or fundraisers. And that way I can represent our club. I can share about all of the great things that the clubs in Scotland are doing, as well as representing here in Iowa as well. So I talk really fast. I apologize if I skipped anything. Actually timing's pretty good. But if anyone has any questions, please do let me know. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about the